Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me for another piece discussion video, this time focused on Windows 100, which is the fifth iteration in the Windows series. Windows is an ongoing series in the postmodern body of work that contemplates the way in which humanity is distorted and diluted and miscommunicated when translated through online interfaces. It is also a series wherein I work through my own personal challenges contemporaneous with the time of each iteration's production, those having to do with my interactions online, but then also those broader challenges that I face in the course of life itself. For a more in-depth look at the series, you'll find a link to the series overview in the description of this video. To start a discussion on Windows 100 specifically, I want to focus first on the title. It is immediately apparent when looking at the title of Windows 100 that it lacks a lot of the other grammar and wordplay of the other iterations in the series, and the focus instead is on the mechanical nature of the series as an ongoing cycle of iterations. I also really liked the sort of sleek and stylish aspect that Windows 100 has. This piece would be the first in a series of pieces in Windows that all use that 100 even moniker. It's this idea of evoking fullness and completion, that this iteration among those that follow it down this line, 100, 200, 300, etc. These are tentpole or hallmark iterations that represent a major progression within the series. I like to look at it as stepping stones in a lot of ways, that the 100 series of iterations is sort of a subset, basically are stepping stones that embrace all within its reach and all within the progressions itself. In this case, with Windows 100, we're looking at the first major progression in the series. With that in mind, I want to turn the attention, of course, to my personal connections and the emotional aspects of this piece. There's an element of context here that I think is really critical, because this first progression in the Windows series took place over the summer of 2021, and this was a moment wherein I was given an opportunity to have a two-person show in the coming fall, and so I was producing all these iterations under a pretense that I would be exhibiting them very soon, and thus there was a sense of urgency that I really had to deliver and that I really had to make sure everything was ready on time. Now, this urgency producing iterations at a clip fed into something that was more broader, because as an artist on social media, I had already been experiencing that sort of tension to be actively producing, to be actively creating new work. And particularly in regard or placing myself along the lines of painters. As somebody who draws, my work takes a great deal of time. Each piece takes the upwards of 50 to 100, 200 hours, etc., depending on a lot of different factors. Even the smallest pieces that I produce at least take a minimum of 20 to 30 hours, which is a lot different from painters who tend to be able to produce at a much faster rate. This sense of inertia, this sense of comparison to others, is one of the things that is being explored through Windows 100. This concept of having to keep building and that pressure of building in order to reinvent myself for the sake of appeasing buyers. This notion of producing pieces, especially in light of that aforementioned two-person exhibition, was also in line with my own personal feelings of the investment proposition, because I was becoming increasingly aware of how much that I was leveraging by producing the work itself and having it ready on time. I was really feeling this idea of having to continue digging and digging and digging. It all swirls around the idea within the Windows series generally that is predicated upon an attempt to keep up with the pace of others in order to maintain appeal to potential buyers. There was a tension, however, that kind of comes along with that, because I am doing this in an effort to also be authentic. So what is embroiled within Windows 100 emotionally has a lot to do with this concept of the pressure that I felt externally from social media and from this opportunity, and then just generally in comparison to other artists, felt at odds or in opposition to my authentic practice, and the feelings that I had to somehow forego my artistic rigor just for the sake of appeasement. And I was really coming to an understanding at this time of how foolish on my part, foolhardy it would be to really embrace that. One of my notes directly associated with the production of this piece says, to create the formula that will please them in Windows. And again, this is returning to that concept that I felt, especially early in my career, that the next piece would be it. The next piece would get the traction. The next piece would really go through the algorithms on social media and attract attention, attract buyers. And so there was always that sort of crack the code feeling. I just needed to produce one more piece, one more iteration. And so I'm leaning into that with Windows 100 because Windows 100 is, again, an exploration of these feelings and helping me to work them out and work through them and to examine just what that does. This piece, in a lot of ways, was a flagship that was launching alongside of me. It was a safeguard, it was a shelter, it was very much a cathartic release for me and for all of these feelings that I regularly was experiencing. This was my haven. Windows 100 was that place. With that in mind, I now want to turn to the composition and the color palette of this piece to see how that really is teased out through the actual imagery. Now, as previously stated too, this piece is sort of the flagship of the first major progression, not just launching with me personally, but it's this whole encapsulation. And so I was under this sort of idea or premise of introducing construction or like an erector set to the Windows series. I wanted to create forms that were akin to sort of an endless building that was going nowhere, essentially, that it was a constant construction site, but with no clear end. I wanted to grow structures and discover the mechanical aspect of these Windows iterations. This was the first major progression, so there was a lot of room for me to sort of explore form and explore what I had the capability to do, because I wanted to create like a mechanical playground, allowing room for play and introducing form to see where the effects went, because ultimately I'm trying to embody the online interfaces, the windows they use online, on desktop computers, on phones. I wanted to use that in conjunction with other ideas and sort of marry them together. And so I'm basically sort of appropriating the interface format in order to then translate into something that feels more akin to a construction site or an erector set. I wanted to also have it embody this idea of a restless blowing apart. The figures amalgamate with the Windows forms, and they almost have a one and the same sentiment. And obviously, they are part of this central axis that is within this piece, and it's all sort of rotating, if you will, or centered on this very direct and strong line. The figures themselves have this sort of blasé aspect, and I wanted that to sort of embody the onlookers who could care less about the work, and the way that the onlookers could also care less about the human being. It's this notion, too, going back to some of the central premises of Windows, how the human form is the one that is miscommunicated, that is diluted. It's the human being itself that is at the sort of disposal of the online interfaces and through the communication. And so I wanted that to be evident in the limbs that are used in this piece because of the way that they lack force. They seem to just be sticking there, to be just kind of blended into this amalgamation. Regarding the color palette, this is obviously embracing the full gambit, and this is setting a precedent for all iterations in the 100 lines, wherein I want to use all of the colors that are within this palette that is Windows. Henna and pumpkin orange specifically are supposed to act as instigators. They're creating this hustle and bustle and this dynamism, and the natural warmth that they have already helps to hasten that activity, and so I was deliberately really seeking those two. Light cerulean is very pushed around. It's sort of a careless attitude. It's sort of mimicking the way that the energy itself is also just kind of blowing things apart, and so those are sorts of the pieces that are left behind, that light cerulean. Pumpkin orange obviously also immediately evokes that sort of construction site aspect, so I'm using diagonal forms. I'm using these forms that look a lot like some actual construction work sort of paraphernalia you may see in real life. And then of course we have sepia and sandbar that are the buildups of steam. They represent the tension and that release, that unending sort of torment kind of billowing throughout the piece. And they're subtly beginning to create those different pockets or recesses that would be later explored in further iterations in the Windows series. All of that said, I want to discuss the placement of this iteration within the series and its larger impact. Of course, as I continue to say, Windows 100 is an establishing shot of establishing shots, because all pieces from this iteration onward that bear the title of a 100 interval in their name would from here on out be an establishing shot for whatever progression of iterations they immediately follow or come along with. Obviously, this was the 5th iteration. This was not necessarily the first, but it was very close to the beginning. And I find that that in and of itself is sort of evidence for how sort of investigatory the Windows 100 pieces are from my point of view, that they're formed and predicated on what is kind of going on actively, and they're not just sort of a rubric or a template, really. They're evolving with the series itself. As mentioned, this is the first place where I'm really starting to discuss these ideas of urgency, needing to keep up with others, keep up with social media, keep up with other artists. It's that hustle to produce, and it really does represent that whole summer of 2021 when I was preparing for that exhibition, feeling the need to deliver, feeling that need to live up to the expectation. So this theme of reinvention and appeasement to buyers, it lives here in this iteration for one of the first times in the whole series, and would obviously later be used time and time again with the series. This was also an opportunity for boldness, as I said, regarding the composition, because I really wanted to experiment with the form, with the interaction of these hues. This is only the 5th iteration in the Windows series, and so this color palette, these forms, they're all still really new and really fresh. And I wanted to introduce elements to characterize the entire series. That's where we start seeing some of these strong diagonals, where we start seeing those stronger shadows. I wanted to get this sense of personal catharsis, wherein I'm being very honest and forthright about what I am doing with these pieces, that I am very much alive as the artist in the Windows series whenever I'm producing them, so that what is going on with me is directly influencing this sort of emotional makeup that obviously filters in through that composition. And so Windows 100, it's setting a lot of precedents, and it's setting a lot of grounds for further maturation that would be iterated upon over and over and over in the series. I think I will stop there for now. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about this piece, and I really do hope it was worthwhile. Please feel free to share this video with anybody else who might also benefit from it and have a deeper understanding of the piece as a result. And until next time, take care.